Captain Starlog, April 20th, 2155. We've been ordered to Kaferia Prime to attend an official diplomatic function. The Kaferians are interested in joining the coalition of planets and want to get to know us better before they get the process started. Of course, the coalition wants to do a check on them as well, which is where we come in. So tonight, we'll put our best foot forward at a formal gala, and tomorrow we'll see what we can learn of the Kaferians' history. Welcome back, everybody, to another mission from Star Trek Adventures Captain's Log. Today we will be doing what I am, for the moment, dubbing the Kaferian incident. If you have not already seen, I have put up a short, should have gone live around the same time as this episode does, where I go through the mission generation process, and you can see all of the various things that I've rolled. I managed to get through a much faster workflow this time around, so hopefully I'll be able to improve the process in the future, and I think this will be a weekly part of our Captain's Log mission together. So let's dive into things. First off, I want to mention the fact that Kaferia Prime, or Kaferia rather, is quite close to Earth. It's only about 8 light years away. Let me see if I can't grab a good part of the map here. That's not great. Yeah, it's fairly close to Earth. Like I said, about 8 light years, which made it, I believe, an excellent point to use for a diplomatic mission for a species thinking about joining the coalition of planets. Again, we're in this kind of time frame, 2155, where there's a little bit of tension. Everyone knows that the Romulans are up to something. Their space isn't terribly far away. So the Kaferians are very interested in joining the Federation the coalition. And the species of the coalition will take as many allies as they can get. So we open with a shot as that Captain's Log is occurring of Captain Sam Bronson getting dressed into his dress uniform. And we don't see these very often in Enterprise. I think the best example is in that series finale that doesn't exist. But it's a fairly nice kind of navy blue uniform, a little more decorum to it than their jumpsuits. And let's see. Get out my notes on my crew here. I think the vast majority of the crew will be joining the captain down on the planets. Absolutely, Subcommander Tassal and Lieutenant Kieran, our Vulcan communications officer, and our Andorian doctor will be joining. That way, at least, there will be 3 species from the coalition represented. I think Commander Wilson, our first officer, will be joining as well. And one other member of the crew. Who do we want that to be? Could do our science officer, Helm, engineering, or our Mako. That is, 4 options? Science, Helm, engineering, Mako. Yeah, 4 options. I'm just going to roll a d20, and we'll see which one of them it ends up being. Okay, that'll be Lieutenant Matthews, our science officer, which I think works just fine for this story. So we see the camera's kind of focused on Captain Bronson as he buttons up an interior part of the dress uniform, kind of brushes off his lapels, and then he makes way for the turbo lift. And again, 2155, he will end up meeting everyone down in the shuttle bay. And piloting the shuttle down will be probably, not that it matters, but we'll make it, one of our people has to have a decent con. No, they don't. I think then that makes it, somebody's better than the captain. Who's it going to be? We'll say that Lieutenant Matthews is a reasonable enough pilot that he will fly the shuttlecraft down. Actually, no, Commander Wilson will. She's got a little bit finer control than Lieutenant Matthews. So the commander will pilot the shuttlecraft down, and we see them approaching a futuristic city, although it's got an element of nature to it that I think is probably surprising to a number of the crew. They're not used to seeing like buildings made out of wood, and at first they're probably thinking that it's like a wood veneer or like those false brick fronts on buildings. But as they land and are escorted by the Kaferians, who are, of course, bipedal humanoids with some quirk of anatomy that sets them off from humans, they actually see that these buildings are made of natural materials, and there's not a whole lot of metal and other resources that have to be mined to their structures. But they're led into a large, like concert hall of sorts. At least it has that sort of acoustic shape to it, and we see them kind of approach an area that's maybe the size of like half a football field. And there are a number of tables set up, and there's a buffet, and there's a band that's playing Kaferian instruments, Kaferian music. I think it's got a lot of woodwind type sounds to it. Heavy on the flute, maybe even some things like the panpipes, a Kaferian equivalent of sorts. But we see, let's go ahead and actually do a task just for fun. As Captain Bronson begins to meet and mingle, and the various crew do as well. We're going to go ahead and do this is a diplomatic endeavor, so his focus in diplomacy will come into play. And this will be presence command straight up. So we're looking at a 16 target number, difficulty 1, shouldn't be too hard. Everyone wants to be there. Okay, that is 2 successes. We have a 6 and a 10. Nothing below our focus, nothing below our discipline value, so we don't need to worry about that. But we will generate a momentum. And we can go ahead and mark that down. So the captain is talking with, we'll say, a Kaferian ambassador, maybe the captain's analog in the Kaferian's own space agency. They are certainly not large enough to explore much beyond their own system, but he probably spends a good deal of time speaking with another starship captain. And the Kaferians are fairly affable people. I think that they would get along pretty well. Let's see. Let me check my notes here. Yeah. So as the dinner and the conversation goes on, the Kaferians start to get into, we'll say, a traditional dance, and maybe it's something like we would see in 1800s England or something like that. I'm picturing scenes from various iterations of Dickens' work. So some sort of Victorian England, I think that's the right era, Victorian England style dances. Very kind of focused, proper, controlled movements, that sort of thing. And as this is a diplomatic mission to start with, actually this is a diplomatic mission in general, we're going to have the Kaferians insist that Bronson and his crew join in. So this is going to be I think some would argue that it could be either control or fitness. I'm going to go for control, as I described it as being that very kind of prim and proper controlled motions. But it's still going to be command, so we'll do a control command. Target number of 13, and the captain does not have a focus in dance. So let's see what we can get. A 6 and a 7. Rolling well today. So the kind of formal dance goes over well, and the group splits back up into a number of smaller conversations. And the Kaferian ambassador says to Captain Bronson, "Well, if you're in the system for a number of days, we certainly have a number of things we'd like to show you. If you've got time, the biggest highlight on a tour of our system, of course, must be Kaferia 3. And I think at this point, Captain Bronson would kind of reply with trying to show off his knowledge of the Kaferian system, and would say, Kaferia 3, that's the planet one step out in orbit compared to Kaferia Prime, is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Used to be our home world, but we had to abandon it a number of centuries ago after a bit of a mishap. However, it does do an excellent job of illustrating our core values and things of that nature to outsiders who may not yet know us too well. Well, I'd certainly be interested in taking a look, especially if you say it's as important to your culture as you believe it is. May a number of my crew tag along? Yes, of course. Might I recommend? I'm actually believe your chief engineer, perhaps. I haven't seen him tonight, but I'm told that your chief engineer is quite an inquisitive fellow. I think he would get a kick out of it, and perhaps your science officer as well. It's quite a tale, I assure you. Yes, I'll have them join us tomorrow. Did you say? Yes, that's just fine. We will. Perhaps we can meet you at your ship in the morning and get a tour of your vessel before we take you to Kaferia 3. That can certainly be arranged. And he kind of gestures to Commander Wilson. Commander, would you set something up with the ambassador here to have a number of his people join us on the Challenger first thing in the morning? They would like a tour of the ship, and then we're going to accompany them to Kaferia 3 for a tour of our own. Yes, sir. I'll handle all the details. Thank you. Ambassador, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And he walks off. Alright. So, I think we'd cut to then the next morning, and the captain has traded in his dress uniform back to the traditional blue jumpsuit, and he's joined by Lieutenant Commander Berglund and Lieutenant Matthews at the docking ring. And we'll say one other officer, probably Major Lambert, our Mako. I think she would join them. I think she's probably on the paranoid side. Doesn't mean she's wrong about it, but on the paranoid side, and would not want to have the captain and two other senior officers left alone with a group of aliens who are still somewhat an unknown element. So I think she'd join them. And the four of them are waiting, and we see the Kaferian ambassador and a trio of other Kaferian individuals come aboard. And we'd cut to... let's see. We'll have it be Lieutenant Commander Berglund giving the tour for the most part, as he kind of tries to describe the various workings of the Challenger. And this is probably a very similar scene to Cold Front in Season 1 of Enterprise. Except without the tour guests being warp field theorists, because that shouldn't happen twice. But on that matter, actually, let's go ahead and do another roll. Commander Berglund attempting a diplomatic function. He is not the person to be doing this task normally, but hey, that's the name of the game. So he's got a presence of 7, command of 1. Actually, in this case, I think it'd be presence engineering, as he's trying to give an engineering-based tour. So that'll be a target number of 11. Still not great when you've got an engineering of 4, but actually, that should be red. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. Okay, that is a failure. We are instead going to spend our momentum and re-roll the 17. I rolled a 14 and a 17. Looking for 11 or lower. Help if I would not drop my dice. I'll just roll a different color. Oh no, that's a 16. That's worse. Awesome. All right, that's slightly better. Anyways, that is a failure. So our third task is a failure. I think he probably has a gaffe and maybe says the wrong thing at one point. I apologize, Ambassador. I did not mean to offend you. And, you know, the situation is awkward for a few minutes, and Captain Bronson would say, Ambassador, please forgive us. We were unaware that such a thing was considered uncultured in your society. Perhaps now would be a good time to make our way to Kaferia 3. And the ambassador, of course, would agree with this. A few minutes later, we would maybe we follow the Actually, no, we'll cut to the four of the Challenger's crew who are going to Kaferia 3. They're going to take the Kaferian shuttle. And I think it has a very different sort of design than we're used to seeing in Enterprise in particular. It's much more like a flying V. It's got wings. It's clearly designed to be usable in atmosphere as well. So maybe they're docked with kind of the point of the triangle upwards and have to do some kind of weird transition as they adjust to grav plating with the point of the triangle being the front of the ship. It's a maneuver that the Kaferians are very much used to, but our crew is not. And for the fun of it, since this is very much a diplomatic mission, we want to see what sort of chaos can happen. And I kind of have an idea of where Act 1 is going to end anyways, so it doesn't hurt us to do a random task here. So I want to see how the captain does in handling that change in gravitational orientation. So, let me see here. This is going to be a fitness... Ooh, fitness... Might be a fitness con test. Yeah, I think spacewalks could be under con, and this is kind of a similar thing. So let's go with a target number of 10. Difficulty 1, again, not terribly hard. It's just something they're not used to. Okay, a 5 and a 19. We do succeed and just narrowly avoid a threat. As the captain, maybe not deftly, but at least with some element of knowing his own body, manages to handle that rotation. I kind of liken it to the scene, I believe it's in Royal Wedding, where Fred Astaire dances on the walls and the ceiling as the set rotates around him. If you haven't seen that sequence, it's fantastic. But I kind of liken it to that. We'll do a camera pan. They'd probably build the set so it's rotatable. And as they kind of walk through the hatch, we'd see them very kind of gingerly walk up the wall until they're standing on the floor. Something like that would be very cool. I'm going to just guess... You know what? I'm going to roll a quick couple of d20s and just see how well the rest of the crew do. Reasonably well. The least fit of them is probably... well, Lieutenant Commander Berglund is certainly not fit. Let's see. Lieutenant Matthews is similarly not fit. Major Lambert does fine, but I think the other two stumble a bit. The ship undocks from the Challenger and heads off at full impulse towards Kaferia 3. And the scene, as we get our first good look at Kaferia 3, shows a part of the planet, and I don't think we'd see the whole planet. I think we'd see about half of it, just the forward-facing side, if you will. But what we can see is there's a handful of very clear settlements that look much more like what we would expect from a spacefaring civilization. Metal buildings, tall spires, skyscrapers, things of that nature. And the Kaferian shuttle is heading for a settlement, not the largest settlement, but one on the outskirts, maybe 100, 200 miles away from the largest city. And the ship comes in, it lands, and the crew exit, followed closely by the ambassador, who says, "Yes, it turns out that our ancestors were very similar, as I understand it, to a lot of the members of your coalition, had been using mechanical devices and simple machines automated machines, I should say, to mine parts of their planet's crusts to handle all of these great developments." And actually, here's a side note, a little bit of a jump back to describe their shuttlecraft, the Kaferian ship. It looks like an extremely hard wood, more like petrified wood than it does metal. And I think that's just a cool note that kind of goes with how we've been describing them so far. But he says, at one point the machines had stopped working, and a quick look at their system showed that they had completely undermined the integrity of the planet's crust. So we left all of the machines turned off, and since well, we had plenty of materials. We were a bit wasteful at that time. Built enough ships to take our people off Kaferia 3 and to Kaferia 2, which we now call Kaferia Prime, of course. And it turned out to be mostly a good thing, as it so happens. Kaferia 3 was on the dry side and certainly colder than we tend to like, as I'm sure you noticed yesterday. Kaferia Prime is much more temperate. It's got plenty to occupy our physical beings in a way that Kaferia 3 did not. So while this may have been our home at one time, I believe most of our population now consider Kaferia Prime to be our home world. Now come, we'd really like to show you the machines in the state that they were left. And we would see the ambassador lead the crew into what looks like a factory of sorts, and then it turns out as they get inside, there are row after row of little robots, little like digger robots. They might have some similarities to the Exocomp. There's a large drill. Some of them have other sorts of arms attached to the front for various mechanisms, but they're all track-based vehicles, nothing more complicated than that. It's at this point that we would hear the machines begin to whir and the kind of foundry area begin to rumble, and we're gonna have Commander Berglund do an insight engineering test. So this is a target number of 14. I think you can see where I'm going with this, and if you've watched the short, the complication for this week, I think you can see where I'm going with this. So let's do an insight engineering test of 14. If he fails this, Act 2 will begin a little bit differently than if he succeeds. Okay, he does succeed. That is a 3 and an 8, so we will generate a momentum to start Act 2 with. However, as he kind of takes a look around, he pulls out a tricorder and starts scanning and says, "Captain Ambassador, it looks like these machines are not as shut down as you thought they were." And we would see a half dozen of them nearest to the group whir to life and turn towards them. And that's where we're going to leave Act 1. I hope you all have enjoyed. Make sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on how things are going so far. Maybe if you would have done something differently. I'd love to hear how every person kind of looks at the same situation. Until next time, I hope you all have a pleasant week. Live long and prosper.